Walls save lives. Walls save tremendous numbers of lives.
This is the border standing up for itself. This is El Paso telling our story.
Build the wall! El Paso, united!
How are you viewing the president talking about it being a national crisis on the border? Do you agree with that? The state of the state for you, it was your third one. And before we get into specifics, did this one feel different than the other two, just from the tenor of the room?
Well, it feels different, and it is different because there's a greater sense of everybody coming together. Everybody in the legislature, in the House, in the Senate, in the statewide leadership, we have a mandate from voters. They want us to get to work and take care of business. They want us to cut taxes, fund schools, improve teacher pay, make our community safer, and rebuild after Hurricane Harvey. And so we have a specific agenda to take care of to make Texas a better place.
The Texas Tribune wrote something that I thought was kind of apt, where they said it was more of a bread and butter speech about bread and butter issues than red meat issues. You agree with that? Well,
these are actually very profound issues that have plagued Texas for a generation or two, that go back to the 1980s and 1990s, where school finance reform has plagued Texas. Property taxes have plagued Texans, and inadequate pay for teachers. And so these have been legacy-based issues where we finally have a coalescence of people in both the House and the Senate to make sure we're going to finally tackle all these long-lasting but enormous issues.
Do you feel like you have a coalescence too, party-wise, with Republicans and Democrats?
You know, a lot of these issues, they cross party lines. Democrats, they too have constituents who are complaining about property taxes. Let me give you one example. And that is, a lot of people, when they think about property taxes and reducing them, they're thinking about people who may be on the high end or something like that. Listen, property taxes are a huge problem with regard to housing affordability for middle and low income Texans. In San Antonio, for example, one reason why you have so many people moving to the outskirts of town, north of 1604, et cetera, is because the price of property is cheaper. What that means is you have what's called gentrification, if I can pronounce it, where people are moving away from their homes they lived in for a long time. And so what we're trying to say is people should not be forced out of the homes they've lived in for a generation just because of the price of property. Also, what you have in San Antonio, you have a lot of seniors who are being forced out of their homes. A lot of military veterans who live on fixed income, who can no longer afford to pay their property taxes. And so this is something that crosses party lines.
You talked about legacy problems. I mean, I remember when I first moved to Texas 23 years ago, that it was, then Governor Bush that was dealing with property taxes and school finance and things like that. What gives you the optimism that there may finally be a solution on the horizon?
Several things. One is because we do have people coming together on the issue, because everybody in the House was just up for election and they heard it so much. As much of a problem as it may have been, let's say a couple of governors ago, let's say with Governor Bush at the time, the fact of the matter is property values are going up more now than ever before. People look at their appraisals. It's 10% or more than 10% that the appraised values are going up. And so even though property taxes have been a plague, they are skyrocketing now more than ever before. And so there's a greater sense of urgency. We must come together and solve this problem.
What do you think the solution is? Give me some specifics on property taxes.
It's really easy, and that is because people's property taxes have been going up on average about 10% per year. We want to cap that and say they can no longer go up that much. We want to be able to cap the maximum amount they can go up at 2.5%. That way the governmental bodies are going to have additional revenue to be able to address the needs of their citizens, but at the same time people are not going to be taxed out of their homes.
I've heard some people say this is going to put an undue burden on local governments when they have potholes and sidewalks and things like that to take care of. How do you answer that with a 2.5 cap?
Well, several ways. One is that with a 2.5% revenue cap, that means they are going to be able to have additional income come in to address the needs of the people, but also it forces cities to do what their constituents have to do, and that is to prioritize their budget. I tell you pretty much every city in the state of Texas, they spend on certain needs and then they spend on certain wants. Their citizens can go line by line on their budget and find things they shouldn't be spending money on. It's a matter of don't spend money on the frivolous things, take care of the bread and butter issues that your constituents want.
One of the things that I was struck by, that I thought you were most passionate about in the state of the state, was schools. Whether it comes to teacher pay, where it comes to how we fund them, whether it comes to safety. Am I correct in that?
You are correct, yes. Yeah, and schools are both a passion of mine, but also a passion of parents and families across the state. We are proud of what we've been doing in schools, but candidly, as I pointed out, we only have about 40% of third graders reading at grade level, and that's unacceptable. We only have about 40% of our graduating high school students who are actually prepared for college, and that too is unacceptable. We have to fix that. And so we have specific strategies to put the best teachers into the classrooms that will make sure these students are going to be on a pathway to succeed. But you mentioned school safety also. It's unacceptable for children to be fearful when they are in class, or for parents to be fearful when they're dropping their child off at school. And so we, as a state, have an obligation to make sure that we make our schools as safe as possible.
How do you do that, though? I mean, obviously, I've heard the mental health piece, getting more security into some of these schools. A lot of people have said they didn't hear anything about gun control or red flag laws, or however you want to say it.
Well, there's several different key elements to an approach. One key element is that one size does not fit all with regard to schools. Some schools want to have certain what they call hardening devices. It could be metal detectors, it could be different types of door security, it could be different things like that. But remember, after the school shooting that took place at Santa Fe High School last May, I had 3 days of roundtables, and we had all kinds of experts come in. There was one profound takeaway that there was unanimity on, and that is we must do a better job of addressing mental health in our schools. And so that's why I made the announcement yesterday that I did, and that is we are going to come out and invest the money, but also in the strategies to make sure that we are better addressing mental health. The good news is there is a proven strategy that's been used in the Panhandle, in the Lubbock area, in the Amarillo area. It's called the Telemedicine Wellness Program, where we are able to identify children who may pose a risk to others at school and remove them from school, but also get them the help they need.
Is the roundtable, is that what you're basically basing where you're going with this recommendation?
The roundtable is a great starting point, but there's so many other avenues of information. But equally important is going to be what happens at the Capitol during the course of hearings. We had basically 3 days of hearings that I conducted, but there will be weeks and months of hearings that take place at the Capitol, and it's important for people from around the state of Texas to come in and weigh in and let us know what their ideas are about this.
When we improve schools, you talked about getting teachers pay increases. You talked about getting better teachers in the classroom. Is figuring out how schools are financed and changing the way that is done now also part of that equation?
Yes, but part of the big goal that we will achieve this session will be school finance, and there's several elements to it that are all very important. One is how much more the state puts in to pay our teachers better. And just as an example so your viewers understand, and that is an example in Dallas. Dallas had a lot of failing schools. They used a strategy to pay the best teachers more, and they suddenly are one of the models in the entire state of Texas. A teacher in his third year is making $90,000. We want to put all teachers on a pathway to earning a six-figure salary just like that. But there's these different strategies that we want to make sure they can be used, that are proven strategies that will make our schools better.
Well, and I know certainly in Dallas or San Antonio, for example, you have different school districts that have much different resources. If you go to Alamo Heights, their resources are much different than if you go to SAISD.
Right. And here's a very important takeaway. 2 key points. One is for the poor performing districts. This will give them additional resources to get the very best teachers to help them improve. You had a school that they were performing at it was the 132nd lowest performing elementary school in Dallas that became the 2nd best performing school in Dallas by having the best teachers go to that school. But also, and this relates to San Antonio in particular, and that is Robin Hood, where you take from the rich and give to the poor. The state will be fixing that, or at least addressing it and improving it by reducing the amount of Robin Hood taken from one school given to another. We will make sure there's equal funding for schools, but it will be the state making up the difference.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, some people would tell you there's got to be something done on a state basis to increase the number put just towards these school districts.
And the budget that I provided provides the funding to make sure it will be the state making up the difference in the Robin Hood districts.
Quickly want to talk about the President's State of the Union last night. He talked a lot about border security, talked a lot about Texas. How are you viewing the President talking about it being a national crisis on the border? Do you agree with that?
Well, look at what's going on as we speak right now in Eagle Pass, where we have caravans of people who are just a few feet away from the Texas border. Many concerned phone calls have come from the Eagle Pass area about the need to make sure to address this. And so we know that Texans are very concerned about it, and we have an obligation to address it. And then, of course, as I announced in my State of the State, Texas, I expect, to step up once again and to fund the state's border security program. Listen, that is not the state's responsibility. That's the responsibility of the federal government in the United States Constitution, and yet the state and state taxpayers are footing the bill for the state of Texas to provide more border security. We want to see the federal government do its job, secure the border, so state taxpayers don't have to fund it.
We came to Del Rio because we wanted to talk to people who live along the border. You can't get any closer than this. The Duffy's backyard is the Rio Grande. Across the way, Acuna, Mexico.
When I come out here, it's just relaxing and peaceful. You've got the river, you know, nobody's bothering you.
And the problems that I had were from this side.
Yes.
When it comes to the border, they have a front row seat.
I was in Del Rio this summer and talked to people who literally have the Rio Grande as their backyard. And the proposed fence line for them is a mile or so inland, so they would potentially lose where they live. Are you concerned about that, about Texas citizens losing their property in this whole thing?
We want to make sure that smart strategies are used, and as people see the serpentine shape of the Rio Grande River, they see that it's sometimes hard. It's not like it is, let's say, in California or Arizona or New Mexico, where the border really is just a flat, straight line. And so we got to find strategies that work. What we need is success. We need to not have the situation that we're having in Eagle Pass right now, where caravans can be dropped off, bussed in from countries far away, and just be able to expect to come across the border without authority. And so that's why the President is really trying to focus on a compromise plan that will fully address a flawed, broken immigration system that the country and our state have been trying to grapple with for decades.
Yeah. Do you agree with him, though, that it's a national crisis?
Well, if you have people coming here who are on the threshold of coming across the border without authority, if you have a state coming out of pocket to the tune of almost $1 billion every biennium, that's an emergency.
Yeah. So you agree with him on that issue. Talk about the voter roll issue. 90,000 signatures were first put out. Now it's kind of changed and been turned around. What's the latest in that, and where do you stand on the voter rolls that we've seen?
Well, people need to understand why this happened in the first place. The reason why it happened in the first place is because state authorities are required by federal law and by state law to periodically review the voter rolls. The reason is because sometimes people die and they should no longer be on the voter rolls. Sometimes people move out of the state. Sometimes it's a fact that people who are in the state illegally, do illegally register to vote, and should not be on there. And so the state is required by federal and state law to make sure that anybody who's not authorized to be on the rolls is removed from the rolls. The problem is this, and that is the Secretary of State only has one set of information. The Secretary of State gets additional information from the Department of Public Safety, but still doesn't have complete information about the citizenship status. And that is why the Secretary of State sent that information that he did to the counties, telling the counties, listen, I don't have all the information. You all have a subset of information that can either verify or debunk the names that are on this list. And that's why the Secretary of State has to work in conjunction with the counties. So as they work together, they're able to determine who was authorized to vote, who was not authorized to vote.
Yeah. Final question for you, kind of going back to our first question. You actually reached out to San Antonio lawmaker Lyle Larson at the end of your speech and talked about, hey, let's do UT A&M again. I mean, that had to be purposeful when this was a guy that you kind of campaigned against to reach out, maybe an olive branch of a football game. Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, it's two things. One is, I think I set the tone yesterday, and that is, this is a session where everybody needs to come together. And that was great symbolism of me, myself, making clear I'm willing to work with people that I previously may have opposed. But second, I would like to see that football game between the Aggies and Longhorns.
Like a pigskin olive branch. Thank you, Governor, for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.